Hi, my name is Jonathan Lamb. I'm a rising junior at Cornell University studying industrial and labor relations, and a part of the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights John Lewis Young Leaders Fellowship. And for my capstone project, I developed a project called Sanctuary Beyond War, advocating for safeguard, disarmament, and human rights. So what is Sanctuary Beyond War? Sanctuary Beyond War is a project committed to safeguarding the rights of displaced civilians, refugees, and migrants, while also advocating for stricter restrictions on military usage of weapons, especially in armed conflict. The main focus of this project was to mobilize youth in both domestic and international advocacy, focusing on the broader mission of disarmament and advocating for refugee rights. The problem statement. So the United States has spent over $1 billion on wars and weapons transfers abroad. This includes countries like Nigeria, Colombia, and Yemen. Some of them are used in actively armed conflict zones, and some are used uh, police brutality that happens abroad when it comes to those that are practicing the right to protest. But regardless, the United States has funded a lot of these military spending that's going around in different countries. So Sanctuary Beyond War is calling for the accountability both in the United States and abroad, and calling for not just the United States but other countries to cooperate with each other to achieve this broader mission of disarmament. Originally, this project was focused on passing the Safeguard Act, which was a piece of legislation focused on safeguarding the human rights around the world, for civilians impacted by U.S. transfer of arms. However, because of the 2024 election, we will see during this presentation the change of the mission. Main partner was USA, one of the largest grassroots human rights organizations in the world, and Legacies of War, an organization focused on weapons like cluster munitions, landmines, specifically the legacies of those weapons in the region of Southeast Asia. And the supportive organizations that later on supported me throughout my capstone was Reverse the Trend, Nuclear Age Peace Foundation, and the International Humanitarian Law and Youth Initiative. So the objectives, again, originally it was focused on just the Safeguard Act, but we'll touch on later what that ended up evolving into. The second point was to focus on international advocacy, so engaging with meetings at the United Nations and stakeholders, diplomats, and ambassadors that are working on different treaties and different policies on an international level at the United Nations. And the last one is youth mobilization. How can we use the resources and information they need to get involved with this organizing work? So these are a few of the activities that I did throughout my capsule project. The first one was getting involved with the United Nations Summit of the Future. This was a historical event at the United Nations before the UN General Assembly that was basically bringing together diplomats, activists around the world to talk about basically how like reevaluating diplomacy and talking about different documents like the Pact for the Future that have strong foundations and principles and pillars, trying to strive for a safer and peaceful world. The second one was at Amnesty International, a Northeast Regional Conference. I was able to provide information regarding the Safeguard Act. The last, or the third one here, is attending Amnesty International's national conference, and I partner up with a co-group at Amnesty International to host a workshop talking about war, weapons, and human rights. Again, equipping students with the resources they needed to talk about weapons and human rights. And this was during the beginning of the current second Trump administration. So things has changed since the first two activities here. The next three activities was I attended the United Nations TPNW, which is the Treaty for Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. Here, I was able to organize side events, submit a working paper on talking about how we can best support victims in a humanitarian lens. I was also able to lobby ambassadors, especially those that are from nuclear free countries, to see how we can further engage with them, especially through the youth activism world and spaces. The second one is USAID petition. I worked with Legacies of War to gather over 115 signatures calling for the Secretary of State to lift the freeze on USAID so that post-war recovery countries are able to receive funding for their programs. And here I attended the youth forum at the United Nations where I was able to distribute a report that I wrote with other individuals talking about the rise in military funding and how that's hindering the UN SDG. And then for the last activity, I was able to go to just a few weeks ago to the UN's informal consultation on lethal autonomous weapon systems. I delivered three statements regarding the considerations of law, especially regarding international lens and the humanitarian lens. I was able to work and collaborate with staff at Human Rights Watch, Harvard Law, International Committee of the Red Cross, and Amnesty International. The second piece here is drafting a policy memo that is currently in its stage, but this policy memo is currently being sent to the newly established Congressional Task Force on Arms Exports. So while the Safeguard Act was not reintroduced in Congress this legislative cycle because of the new president administration, Congress still developed a task force groups to reconsider U.S. arms transports. And recently, they just established a human rights panel that I will be engaging with through my partners at Amnesty International and their coalition partners. And the last activity was I engaged at the NYU AAPI student conference where I was able to deliver a workshop on the legacy of war to the anniversary of bombings of Southeast Asia and to talk about the legacies of these weapons, bombs, and equip again youth and college students the knowledge and resources to get involved with this movement. So the great outcome. So over 370 youth was mobilized. So 50 students were mobilized from the Amnesty Northeast Regional Conference. 100 students were mobilized from the National Conference. 118 students were mobilized from the Legacy of War petition. 20 high schools, 30 youth from the UN Youth Forum, and 8 students supported with drafting the UN report that we had submitted ahead of the Youth Forum. So this is just the beginning, but these were the amount of students that were able to provide information in terms of how can they talk to their lawmakers regarding human rights and weapons. Engaging with the United Nations, I was able to attend 4 main UN, both high-level meetings and public forum meetings that were hosted with the UN, met with over 10 ambassadors, diplomats, and 5 staff at the United Nations, delivered 3 statements to the UN high-level meetings, and submitted 3 reports and working papers to the United Nations, including the TPNW working paper, military spending and SDG report, and the U.S. Human Rights Universal Periodic Review. And the last one, since the actions that were taken, the U.S. response was one, the United States Department of State temporarily lifted the freeze on certain demining operations programs, specifically in Southeast Asia. So while U.S. aid is still frozen, there was some aid that was able to go to these programs after the activism work that we were able to take part in. And following that, we saw that the U.S. congressional members were able to establish an arms transport task force group and a human rights panel. So closing out here, my takeaways from this project was that one, there was a lack of youth engagement. While at the United Nations, there was a lot of youth there. A lot of them came from very privileged spaces that already had these knowledge and already had the funding to support them to attend spaces like the United Nations to support their advocacy efforts. But I saw that there was a lot of youth that were not included in the conversation, especially those that come from minority backgrounds, or especially in the United States, a lot of them did not come from diasporas. So that's including the African American diaspora, the Latinal diaspora, and the Asian American diaspora. The second one was there's a lack of awareness surrounding these international treaties, especially currently right now, a lot of Eastern European countries, because of the Ukraine and Russian war, a lot of them are pulling out of major critical treaties that help create this a better place. And so there's a lot of fear amount around this. And the last one is there's a lack of victim and generation spotlight. So victims of these weapons in armed conflicts are not being centered enough in these advocacy efforts, or not given a platform to advocate on these issues. So the next So Sanctuary Beyond War is continuing its partnership with Amnesty International. We're revising the policy memo, and currently, Amnesty is in this process meeting with different staff that works at the Department of Defense and different government bodies, and we're planning to mobilize on these different policies as through the youth and student groups. The next one is Sanctuary Beyond War plans to restructure and revise our key campaigns. Obviously, throughout this capstone project, it wasn't just focused on one specific weapons, it was focused on a variety of weapons. And so hopefully after this capstone project, I'll be able to revise and revision or restructure and make sure I have a clear understanding of campaigns that I hope to engage with this advocacy project. The third one, we are in the process of building a partnership with the United Nations Office of Disarmament Affairs, specifically their team in Geneva. We're working on establishing future campaign efforts and collaborations with them in the future. For the fourth one, continuing to work with organizations like Legacies Award to spotlight victim stories and centering generational storytelling. And the last one is applying for grants to sustain projects and travel. Overall, this was a very fulfilling experience. It allowed me to realize that I hope to further explore the topics of transnational security, look into humanitarian disarmament, and continue my uh, impactful work surrounding protecting the rights of refugees, migrants that are fleeing war and violence that both the United States and other countries have contributed to.